Good morning. Barry and I talked at the beginning, before we started this class, about the issue that we have at hand, and that we have more lessons in the book than we have days that we're teaching. So we decided that at some point we would either cut one out, or we would weld two together, or do two at one time, or whatever. So we are at the end, near the end. We have one more class after this. And so in keeping with what we discussed, I looked at the lessons and said, what could we leave off? What could we skip? What could we meld together into one? And the quick answer is nothing. And after looking at the videos and looking at the subject matter, became very apparent to me that we're going to drink water out of a fire hose today. We're going to do two in one day. So without further ado, we'll get into this. Today we're going to be talking about Jesus' prayer in John. And to tee this up, Jesus has prayers in all of the Gospels. But peculiarly, the one in John is totally different than any of the other prayers. And so keep that in mind as we go through this.
If you're going to do an explosion, you want to have a physicist nearby, and you want him to understand what compounds you're using and how they're going to react. And if you have somebody who knows what they're doing, they're actually reasonably predictable. That's not quite true when you put the combustible elements of different kinds of Christians together. It seems like even from Jesus' day, there was already a problem with those who identified other followers of Jesus as the enemy rather than their friends. And sometimes when you put them together, what we get are very unpredictable explosions. What we get is not something creative and unitive. What we get is something very destructive. One of the things we notice in the book of John is that Jesus doesn't pray the way he does in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We don't have those agonizing moments in the garden where Jesus is wrestling with God, because part of John's point is Jesus is sort of in control of everything. And those prayers in the other Gospels that seem to show Jesus' weakness and his need for God, we just don't find the same thing in John. He doesn't talk about Jesus in that way for the reasons we talked about at the beginning. There is one long prayer of John in John chapter 17, and it's framed as a prayer, but one of the things you will notice is it doesn't really sound very much like a prayer. What it really sounds like is a sermon disguised as a prayer. Okay, if you're watching this or listening, I want you to think back to that moment when you heard that person pray, where you thought they were preaching you a sermon instead of praying. Has everybody had that experience? And you wonder if this prayer is ever going to be over. You know, it just goes on and on and on. And the prayer of Jesus in John 17 is a little bit like that. It kind of looks like a prayer. It kind of has the form of a prayer, but it really looks more like a sermon. Well, what does he say? Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. For you granted him authority over all people, that he might give eternal life to all those you have given him. Now this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. And now, Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory I had with you before the world began. I don't know if you've noticed, but that passage has a lot of glory in it. And in John, when Jesus talks about glory, it is always with reference to the cross. Now, if you've read the other Gospels, you know that in Mark, when he talks about the cross, it is generally associated with shame. In John, the cross is associated with glory. It's as if Jesus is saying, my greatest moment is when these people think they're killing me. It's when we are going to conquer the world. It's going to be my moment of greatest glory. And in the next lesson, we'll see that. I have revealed you to those whom you gave me out of the world. They were yours. You gave them to me, and they have obeyed your word. Now they know that everything you have given me comes from you. For I gave them the words you gave me, and they accepted them. They knew with certainty that I came from you, and they believed that you sent me. I pray for them. I'm not praying for the world, but for those you have given me, for they are yours. All I have is yours, and all you have is mine, and glory has come to me through them. I will remain in the world no longer, but they are still in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe by that name you gave me. None has been lost except the one doomed to destruction, so that Scripture would be fulfilled. I'm coming to you now, but I say these things while I'm still in the world, so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth. As you have sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. I have given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one, I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am, and to see my glory, the glory you have given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Righteous Father, though the world does not know them, I know you, and they know that you have sent me. I have made you known to them and will continue to make you known, in order that the love you have for me may be in them, and that I myself may be in them. To which the disciples' response is not recorded, but it's... Okay. You got to think again about who John's writing to. He's writing to Christians who are starting to pay a price for being followers of Jesus. And I don't know how it was at the beginning, but now it's getting a little rough. And so John puts this sort of sermon prayer of Jesus into the text to get us to think about it. What happens when things get a little tough? Have you ever noticed that it's pretty easy for people to get all irritated and start to kind of turn on each other when things get out of sorts? you're doing something together and things may be going along pretty good for a while, and then you run into problems, and pretty soon you're sniping and snipping at one another. One of the great preachers of the past has said, one of the reasons we don't evangelize is we're all here in our own little huddle, and the reason we're in our own little huddle is we're afraid if we get out of the huddle, somebody in our own team's going to tackle us. And that had probably started to happen in these communities of Christians, that people on their own team have started to tackle them. And so he does two things in this prayer. He talks about glory, which is associated with the cross, and he talks about unity, which is associated with his relationship with the Father. Okay, so he wants these Christians to know that when you start paying a price, when the world starts kind of kicking your teeth in, what you need to know is that draws you closer to Jesus' glory. Other biblical writers say the same thing. Says, okay, you don't have to be ashamed of the fact that the world hates you. After all, it hated Jesus first. And when the world kind of treats you that way, it makes you look shockingly like Jesus. And the way you need to think about that is not in terms of shame, it's in terms of sharing Jesus' glory. Now, that doesn't get really clear until the next couple of passages where Jesus talks about what the meaning of his death really is. But not only does he get Christians to think about this in terms of glory, he gets them to think about it in terms of unity. He says one of the primary ways that we bear witness to the world is if we are one in the way that Jesus and the Father are one. Okay, if you want to make a list of all the failings of Christianity for 2,000 years, this is probably on the top of the list. Our failure to bear witness to the world of the glory of Christ by our unity, by being one, as Jesus and the Father are one. Okay. Unity is extraordinarily difficult. And the primary reason it is so difficult is because of you. I am right about everything. You are the problem. That's why unity is so difficult. If you would just see that I am right about everything, all of our unity problems would be over. I am not running for Pope, but if elected, I am prepared to serve. And all of Christianity's problems will be solved. Okay. I could say that, but the deal is almost everybody believes that. You hold the views that you hold because you think they're right. And Jesus here presents us with the only possible solution to this problem. And that is, we become so centered in Jesus Christ that we become one, as Jesus and the Father are one. Okay, I'm getting ready to do a finger play. Watch carefully. This is the way I propose you do unity. Here's me, here's you. Okay, if you come over here with me, then we'll have unity. But Jesus says it a different way. He says, here's you, and here's you, and here's the cross in the middle, the glory of God. And as both of us draw closer to the cross, guess what? We draw closer to each other. And that's where unity is to be found. It's always Jesus' solution. That if you will let me be at the center, that a kind of oneness is possible that is never possible when we're all trying to have our own way. And Jesus says the symbol of this is me. Because I find my glory not in being king, but in being lunch meat. Do you remember that? I find my glory not in being Lord, but in washing the feet of the disciples. Do you remember that? Jesus says, I show you how to do it. I show you how to lay down your life, and that's true glory. And then what I ask you to do is to surround the cross, to follow me. And when you do that, we can become one in a way that we never could have otherwise. The question is, on this, do we believe Jesus or not? And so after 2,000 years, the dream is still not a reality. Jesus' prayer that they all might be one is still something that stands in our future, not in our present. But it continues to appeal to our imagination. That moment when all Christians will claim each other as brothers and sisters, when the unity of all believers will be not just a prayer or a sermon, but a reality, when God's dream finally comes true.
Of this unity for each other. Okay, but as Randy depicted with his fingers, which really it was a great depiction, I have always thought that unity with you and unity with you and unity with you was us getting together and talking and thinking alike and acting alike. That's really missing the point. That may be true to a small degree, but it's really missing the point. Okay? So, I have a new mind's eye picture for you. One that you can save, file save, and take home. Think about that short line between God and Jesus. Turn it vertically and have Jesus on one end and me on the other end. Okay? To the degree that I can keep us aligned, I can choose to be in alignment with Jesus. The more I think about Jesus, the straighter my line is, and maybe the shorter my line gets. Okay? But it's not with you and you and you and you. It's not. Okay? I would be in unity with Jesus. Now, what if you make that same line? You have Jesus on one end, you on the other, and you and you and you and you. And you are in direct alignment with Jesus, who's in direct alignment with God, and that line becomes vertical and shorter, guess what? Those lines come in more parallel. Okay, it's a matter of geometry. Okay? No longer am I way out in the wings. The more I align with Jesus, the closer I become to a straight line. I hated geometry in school, but that's it. Okay, if I'd have known how much I was going to use it in my life, I would have paid more attention, I guarantee you. Okay? But think about all these lines that have angles up to a single point. Jesus is that single point. And all these lines will come closer and closer and closer and closer because we're focused on Him, not each other. To me, that is the lesson on unity. And that's what they're trying to talk about. And that's why Jesus says, use my example between me and the Father for your unity. And if we focus in that manner, we will automatically become more unified. And so, yes, sir, Paul.
Don't you think the first couple of chapters of 1 Corinthians is a good example of this? You know, some of you are on Apollos, some of you are on, you know, they weren't, and I think he concludes he concludes with emphasizing Christ, not these different leaders or preachers or whatever.
Right. And you know, Paul had that problem with people wanting to worship him over Jesus. Think about the early Christians in the first part of Acts. They were so focused on Jesus because they had just seen it. They had just witnessed it. Some of them even touched him. Okay? They were that close. They weren't too worried about what others were doing. They were just focused. And what happened? They were really unified. Okay? 2,000 years later, the further we evolve in time away from that point in time, the further apart we move. Unless we're able to focus our faith in that direct line to Jesus, and we will automatically become more in alignment with each other. And we will have a bunch of lines going in the same direction. Then what looks much more like a laser than a bunch of diverging points. Does that mind's eye picture help a little bit in thinking about unity differently? I think that after really studying and thinking about this, I can't look at unity the way I have in the past. It's much deeper, it's much stronger, it has more of a definite purpose, and I see why for 2,000 years we failed at it. Because we've been thinking about it wrong and going about it wrong. This is a revelation to me. I hope to you as well. Joe.
I'm taking your example, and I love it because it came to mind. As we get more vertical with Jesus and we come together through that fellowship, we become stronger.
Absolutely.
Just like a reed or a string or rope. By ourselves out here, we're weak, but as we get closer and focused, tied together, I like all that combined examples of that.
Right. That's absolutely true. Absolutely true and wonderful. And that's examples that we were given, you know. I'm bound and determined we're going to make this work. There's actually some synergies between both of these lessons, and so I'm having to hesitate to say something I really want to say because it's covered much better in the next lesson. Okay, but anyway, I'm a visual person, and it really came to me. I love to see aircraft flying in the air in formation, and where we live, we have the ability to do that weekly and have aircraft flying in formation and doing acrobatics and stuff. It's a hoot to watch. Okay, but to see them flying in tandem is really, really incredible. It's beauty, and I love to see that.
Part of what fits in that analogy, Jim, is that aircraft flying in formation are the only person that's looking out in front is the lead. Everybody else in the formation is focused on a point on the lead aircraft so that they stay there. And the lead communicates over the radio when they're going to make a turn or a climb or a maneuver, and they all know what it's going to be before it happens, so that as the lead starts to move, they immediately move their aircraft to be in harmony and in the same exact distance and relationship to the lead. And of course, as that formation gets bigger, the other people they can't maybe see the lead. The guys that are out here on the edge can't see the lead. They're having to look at the same way at the aircraft that's ahead of and beside them. And so when you think about it, the analogy is Jesus is the lead, and all the rest of the people are there in total synchrony with what he's doing, and therefore with each other.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful mind's eye picture, and it absolutely fits. Yes, Eric?
Anybody ever see the Blue Angels perform?
Right.
There you see unity.
Right.
One mistake and it's all over with.
I one time went to I was actually in Denver, and I saw this IMAX, and it was about the Blue Angels, and it was actually filmed from inside their own aircraft. It will make you absolutely sick to watch this. because they are jumping around, moving around, and they're fighting to try to stay on that one rivet on that lead aircraft. Okay? It's almost like he put a piece of tape on his canopy. He wants that tape to stay on that rivet no matter what that other aircraft is doing. And it's, you can get airsick real quick just watching a film.
I've seen it in person when they performed off the coast of Southern California.
Right.
It'll make your teeth rattle.
Right. It's a beautiful thing. But think about that mind's eye picture. And as we jump into the next one, there's going to be some pieces that fit together when we talk about the glory part. So let's look at the next piece.
The cross in our world has often become a piece of ornamentation or jewelry for Christians. Some crosses are even made to look beautiful. But the cross upon which Christ died was a wooden cross like the one over my shoulder. There was nothing beautiful about it. It was an instrument of execution, and cruel, torturous execution at that. But it became the Christian symbol. And Jesus had an unusual way of talking about the cross. The word he uses is glory. Of all things, the cross would be the place where Jesus would be glorified. What would it mean to look at the cross and not see a piece of jewelry, and not just see an execution instrument, but instead to see the glory of God? When John talks about the trial and crucifixion of Jesus, he does it in ways that are very different from the other Gospels. And there's one theme that comes through over and over and over again. And that theme is this: no one does anything to Jesus that he doesn't want to happen. Jesus is absolutely, totally, 100% in control of the situation. I want to show you just a few passages from the trial and crucifixion of Jesus to illustrate this. First of all, in John chapter 18, when Jesus is arrested. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now, Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches and lanterns and weapons. We call that the Frankenstein verse of the Bible: torches and lanterns and weapons. That's what you go to get Frankenstein with. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, oh, did you hear that? Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. And Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Let us pause. Okay, our English translations really make a muck of this. They come out to arrest Jesus. They have all their weapons and stuff, and they come to get him, and Jesus says, "Who are you looking for?" And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus' response is two words in Greek: ego, eimi, I am. "Who are you seeking?" "Jesus of Nazareth." "I am," he says. And they all fall down. And knowing our Bible as we do, that immediately reminds us of another story, of a story about I am. and a man falling down. It's like Moses in the burning bush all over again. It's as if Jesus is kind of winking at us and nodding and saying, okay, God, me. And the people who came out to arrest him all fall down. And it doesn't say this in the text, that what happens next is Jesus says, well, come on, this is embarrassing. I can't arrest myself. Come on. Let's go. We got work to do here. He wants to make it clear, nobody's taking Jesus against his will. He's in control. In Jesus' arrest and trial, Pilate is really bothered by Jesus in the book of John. He's troubled by the whole conversations. Jesus kind of turns him inside out. Pilate really wants to let him go, but he's afraid of the Jewish leaders who can, kind of create all sorts of problems for him. And at one point, he says to Jesus, don't you get this? I have the power to let you go or to have you killed. To which Jesus' response is, power? Any power that you have comes from above, where I come from. You don't have any power. John wants to make sure that we know that not only can they not arrest Jesus, they can't crucify him unless he wants it to happen. And so then we have the actual story of the crucifixion. It's in John 19, verse 16. Pilate handed him over to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus, carrying his own cross, because he can do that in John. He's the Son of God. Cross, no problem. He went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. Here they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. How's that make you feel? You wouldn't be able to read it in 3 languages. The chief priest of the Jews protested to Pilate, do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be the King of the Jews. Pilate answered, what I've written, I've written. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes, dividing them into 4 shares, one for each of them, with the undergarment remaining. This garment was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. Let's not tear it, they said to one another. Let's decide by lot who will get it. This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, they divided my clothes among them and cast lots for my garment. Why did they gamble for Jesus' clothes? Because it was in the prophecy and it had to be done. So this is what the soldiers did. Not because they decided to, because it was in the prophecy. It had to be done. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, Mother, here is your son, and to the disciple, here is your mother. From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. What is Jesus doing while he's on the cross? He's doing domestic relations. Mary, son, mother. Doesn't look like a suffering Jesus. It looks like somebody who's pretty much in control of the world. Later, knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that Scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. Okay, that one's easy to miss. Jesus says, I am thirsty, not because he's thirsty. John would never say that. Jesus says, I am thirsty so that the Scripture will be fulfilled. A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on a stalk of the hyssop plant, and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. It's really interesting that in the book of John, Jesus doesn't really get killed. He decides. And it's almost as if he's going down his checklist. Okay, let's see. Crucifixion. What do we got here? Gamble for my clothes. Okay, done. John, Mary. Done. Okay, we're done. No, I forgot. I'm thirsty. Okay. Done. I'm out of here. And with that, Jesus gives up his spirit. It's an absolutely different way to tell the story. It's one of the glorious things about the Gospels is they give us these very different views of what's going on here. And from John's point of view, the one thing he wants these Christians he's writing to understand is this. Jesus died the shameful death of the cross because Jesus decided to. Nobody kills Jesus. Nobody arrests Jesus. Nobody tries and beats Jesus without his permission. That's what John wants you to understand. And that what Jesus is basically doing here is he is telling this story with his life. And he's saying, when you look at this, you just shouldn't see cross, you should see glory. This is the fulfillment of what God intended for the Word become flesh. Jesus is going to show us how to do it. Okay, now, I got to really be careful here, so I want you to really listen close to this. There is nothing sadder in the world than people using their power over other people to do bad things. And there is nothing more glorious when those who have the power lay it down for the sake of people who don't have any. And that's the story that John wants to tell. Jesus, who has all the power in the world, who with a word, "I am," can fell the soldiers who come to arrest him, decides that he will die for you. So when John tells the story of the resurrection, we're not surprised because Jesus has been in control of this story all the way. We know how it's going to end because nobody could take the life of the Logos and expect him to stay dead. We're not surprised because Jesus raised Lazarus, and we know he has the power of life and death. With all the power in the world, Jesus says, "I am the one who is lunch meat, washes the disciples' feet, and lay down my life. This is my glory." And this is John's gospel. This is the good news that John has to share. John thinks of Jesus much less as a victim when he looks at the cross, and much more as the righteous martyr. Nothing happens to Jesus without his permission. And so it's not so much that Jesus was killed as that Jesus laid down his life. The cross is not something that just happened to him. The cross is what Jesus embraces as his fundamental identity, his fundamental glory.
designed the cross is intended to be the ultimate in cruelty, pain, suffering, and shame. It demonstrated the power that they had over the people that they wanted to subject. For Jesus, he used that cruel invention to be the launching pad for his glory. That is mind-boggling. How many times in the Bible do you see a person who is the least likeliest to do something really wonderful with the power of Jesus behind him? Okay? Same thing with the cross. It was never intended to be anything like what Jesus made of it. Can you imagine a mind's eye picture of a cross? Instead of having a crossbar on it, it's got a high ladder-back chair out of a Mexican restaurant nailed to it. And he sits on that chair and they fold him up. That's Jesus' throne for that moment. And he's on his throne about to blow the world away with all his glory. It was not intended for that. The soldiers falling at their feet when he says, I am. What? They represent the Roman government. Pilate was the same way. He recognized something very special about Jesus. And he likely thought maybe he's probably exactly what he says he is. Well, the soldiers either knew in advance that and probably fought each other to not be on this detail, okay? But at least God caused them, they caused them, somebody caused them to fall prostrate in front of Jesus when he said, I am. However, the Jews would never see that. But it's amazing that those events linked up. So without the cross, we don't have the glory. So let not fear drive us, but live a life of cross-shaped faith in the one in control. Let us have our faith, the one in the control. You remember the line. We're at the end of that line. Jesus is on the other end of that line. That line is our faith going up and his glory coming down. Okay, that's what's on that line between our two positions. Take our identity in his light, his life, and his truth. Live it and share it. Jesus is our vine. These are mind's eye pictures that we can take from this cross, which was designed to be so cruel and ugly and to shame people into being subjected. And at the other end of that cross, his glory is what releases us and allows us to go and be with him. I don't deserve that. But that's what's on the other end of that line. And that line is a straight line. It's a straight path. So as we think about and make a conscious decisions day over day to increase our faith, increase our focus on Jesus, then we are on that line. And for all those that are doing the same thing, our lines are coming together. And they're meeting at the glory point that Jesus started at the cross. That's our future. That's our destiny. He chose us to do that. There's nothing we could do to make that happen. He chose us. We just have to say yes. And yes starts our journey on the line. Thank you for being here, and thank you for drinking water out of a proverbial fire hose today. But these two lessons had some really strong points that I just hated to think about us not getting to see. Next week, our last class, we'll be talking about the resurrection. and it will also be a good one. Thank you. Have a blessed day.